So this is the third in our monthly podcasts. And I had a wonderful conversation with Josie Billington, a professor of English literature at the University of Liverpool in the UK. We talked about not just literature, but all of the arts and how the arts are there for us to help us create pockets of silence, places of quiet in our lives where we can think and connect with ourselves and connect with others. And so we talk about literature, we talk about music, we talk about painting and the visual arts. And Josie's work for many years now has been in where the arts and mental health and health come together. So she has an enormous amount of expertise and knowledge about how the arts really help us, how they help us come to balance, how they help us when we're in crisis situations, and how they keep us well. It has been on my mind for a long time to speak with Josie and to bring her on our podcast or our weekly Zoom to talk about this, because where we're located right now in our program as it's unfolding is at the changeover from talking about attention to talking about emotion regulation, and from experiencing the natural world into experiencing beauty as human beings produce it. So really as the arts. There's so much richness there. And when we sometimes think about it, let's experience art, we think of it as a big deal. And we think that, we have to go somewhere special and do something special. And the thing is, as we discover in talking with Josie, we don't. It's 5 minutes here, it's 5 minutes there, and it's putting together our storehouse of things that we love and things that we connect with. And that's how we connect together with the kids. To just do these things, have these experiences over and over and over again. So beauty, art, can be a practice, just like our other practices. So I just wanted to start, as we start all our meetings, with a short practice just to sort of get ourselves settled in, settled down. So the two of us can do that. So I offer you an opportunity to become a little quiet. So if you'd like to close your eyes, that's cool. If you'd like to keep them open, that's cool too. So, and just noticing what's happening with you in the moment is really what this kind of quiet or silence allows us to do. Just to get in touch with how we are. And sometimes getting in touch a little bit makes things easier in us. Maybe there's an ease to how you're holding yourself. Sometimes it becomes easier in the mind. And sometimes it's easier to see and think more clearly. And so I think that's what the painter Mark Rothko was talking about when he was reflecting on his early life as a um, as a struggling painter when there was no money and no galleries and no crowds. And he says, you know, it was a golden age. We had nothing to lose and a vision to gain. And he says, now we have tons of verbiage, activity, and consumption. And which condition is better, I shall not venture to discuss. He said, but I do know that many of those who are driven to this life are desperately searching for those pockets of silence where we can root and grow. We must all hope we find them. Pockets of silence where we can root and grow. And that for me is one of the things that we're after in this program of learning life skills together, is to give people, the possibility of coming to quiet, of calming themselves and finding out what really matters, rooting down and growing. So I'm wondering if you have a response or reflection on how that was for you.
I it reminded me of something else, and I don't know whether that's allowed.
Everything is allowed.
Introduce because I was going to bring this anyway because I it's a book that I always return to for some of the practices that you're talking about in this program. And it's Marianne Milner's A Life of One's Own, which you probably have read. I mean, I've read it at various points in my life. Marianne Milner,
Okay. Yeah.
the psychotherapist, and it you know it just so brought back one thing that she says. If you don't mind me, just
Oh, please.
reading a little bit of it.
Yeah.
Um, and this is after she's learned a few practices that help her locate those pockets of silence, but that those means of locating them go away from time to time. So I'll give an example in just a second. But she says, often when I felt inadequate, she's recalling this, I tried to make up for it by striving after the things other people did. Um, when I felt dull and had nothing to say at parties, I would still make resolutions to read more books so that I would know more about the things the others were talking of. I would resolve to read the papers every day, and I tried not to miss what was going on. I wanted to have seen the latest well-spoken of film or play. In buses and tubes, I was always trying to think so that I would have views about things and be able to hold forth as other people do, giving my opinions. But the only result seemed to be frequent weariness and a constant sense of the number of things I had to do, piling up and toppling over upon me. When I stopped to think, it used to amaze me how I could for months together be caught up in the rush to get things done and completely forget how I had found a way of altering the quality of my experience. And I'll come to how she does that in a moment. But I was so struck by how it's as if it's the problem from the other side, from the receiving side, in a way, that there's so much to consume, so much activity,
Yeah.
that even just as a perceiver, not necessarily as a creator, you can't locate what's important. And this is a person who has all of those things at her fingertips if she wants them. But
Right.
so many of the resources that we'll be talking about today might not always be available to people when they need them, and they were, but she couldn't access them in the right kind of way. And the quality of experience, the reason I'm mentioning it is in the context of thinking about the arts, is that she says that she's interested in pictures, but worried that she didn't know what she should feel about them. And
Mm.
but one day she's in the gallery. I stopped in front of a Cézanne still life, an impressionist painting, green apples, a white plate, and a cloth. Being tired, restless, and distracted by the stream of bored Sunday afternoon sightseers drifting through the galleries, I simply sat and looked, too inert to remember whether I ought to like it or not. Slowly then I became aware that something was pulling me out of my vacant stare, and the colours were coming alive, gripping my gaze, till I was soaking myself in their vitality. Gradually a great delight filled me, dispelling all boredom and doubts about what I ought to like. So again, that's like kind of finding that it's about a kind of letting go and of oughts
Mm. Yeah.
and finding it that way. But it is as though um, th that's a kind of golden moment because all the verbiage, all the activity, all the sense of consumer consumption kind of disappears. But you have to
Yeah.
work hard, you know, to allow it to kind of let go into the experience itself, or as she calls it, the vitality. That's what's interesting. I was soaking myself in the vitality
Vitality. Yeah.
of
Yeah.
art.
The liveliness of those lines and colors. Yeah.
Yeah,
Absolutely. And yeah. So she said something about striving,
yeah,
to striving to do these things. And she looked at pictures and she didn't know what to think about them. And then she stopped. Yeah, thinking and
stopped
yeah,
thinking.
and got it. Yeah, that's
Yeah,
awesome.
yeah,
Yeah, and so that's what we're sort of moving into now in our learning life skills together program. As it sort of unfolds, we're looking at attention. We've been looking at attention for a long time, and certainly there's the place of attention in what Mark Rothko's talking
yeah,
about and what this person is talking about. And we're moving into looking at beauty and awe as a result of a kind of attention and as something that is actually good for us, something that has a significant effect on our mental health and well-being, as well as on our physical health, I do believe. So, I really wanted to talk with you specifically about the beauty and awe that all the arts can bring us to, if we allow it,
yeah,
right? And how that looks, how that plays out in people's lives who may be just longing for some kind of um, feeling of rest, resilience, and people who are suffering, people who are looking for something to I don't I dare I say heal them, you know. So we could start certainly with literature because that's kind of where you and I met, and um, a lot of your work has been looking at reading and literature and what that brings us on the sort of mental health and health side. So I'm wondering where you might want to start with that.
yeah. It's interesting because it probably isn't the most obvious place to start in some ways because it might not seem such an immediate um, there might not seem the same sort of immediate engagement that you might get with music or with art if you are kind of or with the kind of arts where you're taking part. It can seem to people quite a passive, I suppose, activity, as well as one that is, mediated by a language that people might sometimes find difficult, and maybe they've had difficulties with reading at school. So sometimes it's not the
Yeah.
most obvious thing. And I've done a lot of work with the Reader, and I know that Claire Ellis, you were speaking to recently from the Reader, they've worked very hard to overcome that difficulty that people might experience of thinking that literature isn't for them through their shared reading aloud model, so that people experience the literature as a kind of embodied human presence. It's in the room because it's mediated through a human voice. And often the kind of literature that's read is where people have used used literature to express painful experiences, but sometimes the pain that has gone into something like a Shakespeare sonnet can be hidden by the fact it's a Shakespeare sonnet, and people are worried about
Mm.
Shakespeare. It's not for them. So they almost need it to be brought alive. But the effect very often of that voice that seems to communicate across the years is that it surprises people not only out of what might be an initial sort of hostility or fear about literature, but surprises them into a new feeling. And I think that's quite critical when people are hurting or in trouble. It's quite easy for them to, all of this, but to have a kind of sense of disconnection from not only other people, but from themselves, and to not quite feel as though they are fully alive. So
Yeah.
even something as simple as a poem speaking very directly to a person, I mean, it can have quite profound and quite dramatic effects. People having to leave the room because it's too close sometimes.
Mm.
But it is that sense of kind of involuntarily being moved, which is a sign that that you're still there to be moved, that there's something that
Mm.
is still very much alive in you, even if you feel kind of that there's a sort of dullness in relation to the rest of the world.
Yeah.
That's a
Yeah.
really important aspect, I think, of reading literature. Not everything does that for everybody, but it doesn't need
Right.
to. There's always
Yeah.
something that will do it for somebody.
Yeah. Yeah. And so, I mean, that's to just loop it into the life skills, that ability to notice what's happening with you when you're experiencing a poem, a story, um, you know, to say, oh, watch what happens with me, let me pay attention to this now.
Yeah,
I think it's really important because we're not actually, I don't think, educated to do that. We're educated to pick things apart or, connect it to something else other than this right here,
yeah, yeah.
and yeah, yeah. And so you, in your research work, have looked at what that does for people, what that getting connected to themselves through reading does.
It's interesting because I was talking about, um, you know, reading as a sort of passive activity, which I don't think it is at all. I mean, or people do talk in terms sometimes of living a life alongside their own. I mean, we've done work with women in prison, who have been separated from their children, and who are in many cases victims themselves, who feel that the anxiety, the pressure of their lives is so strong that they can live another life alongside it if they're reading a book or a poem. But it's much more often the case that it's not just a kind of distraction. It's as though um, it's almost as though the capacity to live another life alongside your own is brought about by being wholly emotionally and mentally engaged with that other world that the literature
Mm.
offers. And so that's a whole person thing. It's not just that the person who's not getting on very well with life is kind of put on one side, and the other person, another activity is engaged with. It's as if that whole person, not just the person who is struggling, is kind of engaged by this process. And I think that's really important. It's not just it's a reminder that there is more to this person than the person who is finding life difficult. There is a capacity for joy,
Mm.
for
Yeah.
absorption, and all of those things are really important reminders for people who've kind of lost a sense of themselves. So, when you're getting something from a work of art of any kind, but a work of fictional poetry, it's almost it's as much because it has stimulated in you a kind of effort to give something, and that effort in itself, and effort of concentration. I've heard it called disciplined relaxation, which I think is a really by participants in shared reading, which I think is a really good way of thinking about it, that you do
Yeah.
allow yourself to let go into the activity, but you're in it. You're still alert and alive, more alive within it.
Yeah.
So it's a form of kind of recovering parts of yourself that you may have forgotten there are not kind of exercised. And I suppose those are emotional, it's getting in touch with emotional aspects of yourself. But what, of course, reading does, which arguably other forms of art don't do in quite the same way, is that you also have a language. So very often what's difficult for people when they're struggling with emotion, and this is, for young people, very young people particularly, I was listening to one of the podcasts from your developmental doctor, and how it can
Mm.
be difficult for children to name their experience, but it can be difficult for anyone to name their emotional experience when it's very painful. So
Yeah.
what literature can also do, as well as stimulating that kind of emotional response, can offer a language for a kind of feeling that has lain around unnamed or unrealized. It can kind of give a form for experience that's otherwise kind of chaotic inside.
Yeah. No, absolutely. We have been talking about that particular thing, the vocabulary to express our emotional states, and how incredibly important that is for kids growing up. That as we enrich their vocabulary, their whole experience of the world and other people changes. And so instead of just melting down or going into anger, if you have, irked, to say I'm really irked with my sister is very different than I am so mad at you. Yeah. And so to think about that, you know, sort of beyond the littles, beyond the little kids, and to say, we need that too. And parents need it because our lives are really complicated and the feelings that come up really, need uh, that kind of filter through language so that we can get hold of them, and to go to a story, to look at a character who's, maybe not struggling in the same way, but struggling at the same depth, to see how that gets expressed, I think is really, really important. And this program is for everybody. It's for the parents and the kids. And sometimes we can focus a little overly on the kids and neglect ourselves in that way. And so, you sort of given me the chance to say that to the adults that that they can grow their vocabularies and their experiences of
Yeah,
emotion as well. Yeah, wonderful.
because it's true that it also, it's perhaps more amorphous, feels more amorphous when you're young, but it gets more complex and amorphous as you get older. And also you're supposed to know what you're doing in life.
Right, right. Yeah,
So when you encounter someone, it's very common for people to say, "This is me," and not in a casual way, but in a sort of
yeah.
astounded. This is me. They've just described me. Um, and then people feel less lonely because they thought these were feelings they shouldn't have somehow, and that they were
Mm,
kind of secret guilty experiences of not enjoying their life as much as they should, or um, and even something as kind of uh, sort of something which isn't quite an emotion, like dissatisfaction is quite hard to describe very often, but it can kind of hang around in people's lives. And when people see that other people have this too, then it normalizes it. I mean, it makes it a part of the kind of human um, way of being alive rather than something wrong.
yeah, yeah.
It really just kind of widen the sort of repertoire that people have for understanding their own experiences, I think, because it can feel that people can get very kind of locked into their own sense that this is somehow inadmissible, this experience.
Mm,
And then they
yeah,
kind of get locked into their unconscious, so they need something to draw it out from the outside almost.
yeah, yeah. So, so the part about always having a book, always, always, always reading, always, being exposed more and more to all of the world lets a give, offers us a gift like that
Yeah, yeah.
to find ourselves at some point. Yeah, great. So let's see. If we want to move to thinking about the other arts, because you were pointing out how literature is slightly different in that it gives us language, and the other arts don't necessarily come. They come laden with language, actually, if you're reading about them, but the actual experience isn't of that. So, um, where would we start? I mean, you've worked with sort of groups that are using the arts for health,
Yeah.
and you've done research in that area. So, how about music?
Yeah, I've done quite a lot of work recently with musicians who are working in music and mental health. And the reason that happened, if I can just go back slightly, because my background is literature, so it's quite odd that I
Right, sure.
engaged with all of these other arts. But it was because of what happened during COVID, really, when we understood the kind of, it became kind of starkly visible how important the arts in general were for health and well-being, because we didn't have them anymore, or people were not able to access
Mm,
them.
yeah.
And so we were able to carry out a study which looked at the impact of reduced access, but also of accessing arts and culture through other means during lockdowns, when people were often, as you know, very lonely and struggling with anxiety.
Yeah.
And it's not very surprising that we found that those people who were able to engage in arts activities during, this was mainly during full lockdown, had kind of statistically significant reductions in anxiety and depression. So it almost took something like taking these things away to make us think, well, let's measure then what happens if you've got
Mm,
access to nothing else, but you can access the arts. You can't see your loved ones, but you can access the arts, and it made
yeah.
a huge difference. So and people were describing the arts as a lifeline. And so that's another area where a lot of the time, I think the discourse around the arts, I will come to music, I promise. This is just say a
No
way to
worries.
explain how I got to work with musicians, is that it overcomes socialization. People get together.
Yes.
And of course, people were getting together on Zoom and singing together and so on. But I think there's a sense in which I think what it helped to show us was that it's not it's not just being together with other people, it's the mode of connection with other people, it's the way you're connecting with them. And there's something about the connective power of arts and culture, which the fact that it kind of draws out aspects of people that they don't usually exercise. You know, when they meet at the shops, they're not that kind of dimension of joy or of depth or of sort of feeling essentially alive that can sometimes come from engaging with the arts, that vitality again that Marianne Milner was talking about. Um, you know, it's great when that comes out of one person. When it's coming out of a number of people together simultaneously, it's a different kind of community. So I think it's to do, and I think music is really important there, because it is, I've been arguing that poetry is just as immediate, but I think it is very connected, poetry, to music, of course, and it's particularly
Hmm. Yeah.
connected to, I am going back to literature, I'm sorry, I can't help it, but um, there are recent kind of linguistic studies that have shown that the qualities of things like baby talk, the way that a mother speaks to her child, you know, is full of musical, poetic qualities, repetition, rhythm.
Yeah.
And you know, of course, these things are part of attachment, but they also suggest that there has been a kind of biological need for this kind of connection that's mediated through music forever, you know, that's part of our very primitive.
Yeah.
So I guess as well, what's happening when music or poetry are engaging people very profoundly emotionally, um, it, you know, has to be something to do with the fact that there's some kind of substrate of it, something that needs that kind of um, emotional connection through rhythm or through that's non-verbal, that's pre-verbal, that's pre-linguistic, that's pre-everything really. You know, it's before we understood what it was to think or to know ourselves.
Yeah. Yeah.
We could just be ourselves in that
Yeah,
sense.
to go back to that baby talk and lullaby singing and
Yeah,
everything. Yeah, is that
yeah,
we are touched. We are
yes,
moved, as you said in the opening there. We are
yeah.
moved by things. We are moved by music. Yeah.
So I think when the musicians that I've been working with take they're classically trained musicians, but many of them have said, you know, their most rewarding work is not uh, playing in the orchestra; it's going into, you know, refugee asylum centres or into secure hospitals or into community mental health centres where they are with people who think that they don't know anything about music, and then by the end of an hour, they're helping to produce it. And it's the same language that comes out. You know, I feel alive. I feel valued. I feel as though there is a self there again.
Hmm.
And it does a wonderful thing to the whole kind of atmosphere of the place. We found this with reading as well. It doesn't really matter where it happens. It doesn't matter whether it's a GP surgery or a library or something very kind of highly clinical or something very soft and cozy. The poem or the music produces its own atmosphere. It takes its own atmosphere with
Hmm.
it. Um,
Yeah.
uh, so that has an impact on the environment in general. You know, on the people who are caring. I'm thinking of parents and children engaging in this as well. You know that
Yeah.
changes the quality of relationship between the people who are day by day doing task-driven things, or the kinds of functional things that we all have to do all the time, and that we
Yeah.
tend to end up doing with people we love, and then you forget that that's, there are other modes of engagement, but music and reading can really help to promote those different
Yeah.
ones, more kind
Yeah.
of attuned forms of engagement, I suppose.
Yeah. And they do naturally come up in the household, you know.
Of course.
Something comes on somebody's stream of music and everyone is sort of bopping their head and dancing, or it's the 5 minute break. Okay, let's sit down and read this book, honey. And we put the kid on our lap and we read for 5 minutes and look at the pictures, and it's that pocket of silence, to go back to that again. It's that, okay, this is what's happening now. Here we are, and we're connected to we're connected to each other and to something that's underneath all of that, our
Yeah.
humanity, or whatever we want to call it. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, the kind of the psychologists who've done a lot of work on like Daniel Stern, on the kind of vitality affect between the parents and children, say it is a kind
Right.
of thread. It doesn't really matter what you do, so long as you're picking up that thread that is
Yeah.
that is the attunement between the two of you. And
Yeah.
so all of these kind of things that happen quite naturally can be part of um, uh, re-establishing that thread. I was
Yeah.
I was also listening to the podcast on birding.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Yeah.
Um, because I thought it was just wonderful, because so many people during COVID did begin to think about
Oh, yes.
birds in a
Yeah.
different
Yeah.
kind of way.
Yeah.
And one, I can remember one morning hearing, which is quite unusual in my urban existence, hearing a blackbird singing. I mean, absolutely joyfully, just singing.
Hmm. Yeah.
Nobody else was around, and I'd never really heard that before. But it made me think of something like Keats's Ode to a Nightingale, which is very different, about a very different bird. But he says in it something like "Too happy in thine happiness," and I think that was the feeling I had, was both that it was joyful, but there was something very sad about the fact that the bird could sing that joyfully, but no human probably ever could, quite without a sense, just be joyful without a sense of
Mm.
or anything.
Yeah.
But I was thinking, it made me think that we've been doing some work with um, people in Glasgow who were doing well-being in the woods, who are taking people out, and
Right.
um, they're taking photographs of in groups together, but taking photographs because it's actually a way of uh, concentrating. And there's some of them are saying, I'm shaking all the time, but when I'm doing this, I'm not shaking because I'm so much in the
Yeah.
experience.
Yeah.
And it was making me think that there are so many wonderful pieces of literature about nature, and if there, I couldn't help remembering that poem, but maybe if children have been out watching birds, that and then a poem later in the day could kind of connect to that, but not too forced, then the child would always remember the connection between whatever that experience of nature was and the poem, and that
Mm.
helps. Then reading becomes part of other experiences as well.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. There's a lot in that. And from the perspective of this program, the first thing is that what we're talking about almost always is moments, like your moment with the blackbird. I mean, that didn't go on for a long time, but it moved you in a way, out of where you were into somewhere else, and created a cascade of pleasant things for
Yeah,
you. So we get to Keats through a
yes,
blackbird. Yeah.
yeah,
And so that doesn't take long. And as you're saying, if you're out and about and you have that experience with your child, and you go home and you read a poem about a blackbird or listen to a Beatles song about a blackbird or
Yes.
whatever it happens to be, you're doing all those things. I mean, so many things, bonding you and the child, that whole developmental piece, as well as, you know, giving language around this experience.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, which is really, really helpful for them and for you, you know.
Exactly. It helps to hold on to the experience. It helps to
Yeah.
tell you something about what the experience meant.
Yeah, yeah, and someone else's words can take you to your own, and you can,
Yeah.
thereby say more about it. One of the classic questions, right, is, can you say more about that? And it's no, but with a prompting or a preload of a poem or something, yeah, I can talk about this more. So. Yeah, wonderful. We're not quite at music yet. Well, I mean, one of the other things that I wanted to say about birding is that it's like and unlike these other things that we're talking about, and it's something that goes on all the time.
Mm.
Once you are a birder, no matter where you are, you could be in one of the great big stores that we have here, and you probably got them too, that are just so enormous that there are birds nesting inside.
Yeah. Yeah.
So no matter where you go, you can be seeing birds and watching what they're doing. And I think, as you develop over time with literature, and you fill your storehouse a little bit, you know,
Yeah.
it's
Exactly.
something that just comes up during the day. Oh, that reminds me,
Yeah.
which you have done like 3 times now. That
Yes.
reminds me. Wait, yeah. No, I mean, and that's a great thing. I'm saying it's a very, very satisfying and fulfilling way of talking together,
Mm. Mm.
to bring in other minds.
Just to go back to the music, one of the things um, that I was thinking of actually is that the reason it's so powerful, um, if you think of these musicians play for the Royal Liverpool Philharmonic, and they're thinking of themselves as this kind of, they think that it's important that a prestigious organization like that, a bit like the way I feel about literature, that doesn't just belong in universities, it's for everybody, and that's how they feel
Yeah.
about music. And I suppose what they experience for themselves as well as the staff, as well as the people who've had in some of these institutions had all sorts of labels put on them, and that. But that hour when people are making music together and saying, I liked that, it's nothing to do with the rest of their problems or anything else. I liked that. So they have a voice expressing, and then they're finding they like classical music, or then they're finding out something about music. But I think the key thing is that everybody in the room at some level kind of slips themselves, that they don't have to be um, who they've come to believe they are, or
Yeah.
often that's it's not a great the identity that they've had foisted upon them or given themselves is not one that they're comfortable with. So to actually let that go, and either in listening to music or in making it. And there are some wonderful compositions that the musicians have made. So I think it is to do with it's that odd paradox, isn't it, that you have to give all of yourself to kind of forget yourself in a way, that you're
Mhm.
still in it, but you have to uh, there is that need to forget, but but it isn't the same as not being there. It's a
Oh,
strange
it's
paradox.
yeah, it's actually, to me and my experience, is actually being there more fully
Yes,
when you
yeah,
let go of that identity that you're carrying around, whether you created it or somebody gave it to you, as you said, to slip that
yeah,
uh,
yeah,
is really a stunning thing, and um gives you vitality. Let's go back to that word. Some vocabulary that we're developing here. Yeah. Yeah, there's vitality to letting those things go. We become, we can move anywhere. We can
yeah.
do a lot more in our minds and bodies. So, yeah.
I guess also what's happening is that when people feel better, it's also, whether it's a piece of music, whether it's a photograph, whether it's a poem, um, especially when it creates a kind of emotional reaction, it is the emotion is no longer simply inside, it has a formal equivalent outside of it. Psychotherapists will call this a container for the emotion, but it's important, the container that the parent used to be for all those emotional feelings. Once you're an adult, you still need a container because
Right.
and it can hold, you know, the emotions slightly outside of oneself and at a distance, but still recognizably one's own. So it becomes more
Yeah.
as well.
Yeah. So we can put them out there, go visit, and then bring them back again.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. Maybe our visit has changed things a little. Yeah. Yeah. Cool.
yeah. That's what the hope would be.
Yeah. And so that goes really for all of the arts that we're talking about here. I mean, so we've talked about music. We've talked a little bit about painting, just because of Mark Rothko and Cezanne. And so, is there work in that area that you're doing or familiar with that would help us sort of think this through?
Within the arts.
Yeah, within the visual arts. Yeah.
Yeah, we did. There was a lot of work. I mean, I'm thinking particularly of children. There was a lot of work done by galleries during COVID to actually, because it combines so many things, to actually make people um, use, the kind of concentration on the visual that everybody seemed to be noticing more during COVID, but actually they were more constrained in what they could do with that noticing. So um, some of the art galleries locally actually sent out packages for families to work together, on kind of drawing and colouring together, just their everyday
Yeah.
life.
Yeah.
And some of the work that you've been part of, Don, that we've done with internationally with organisations working with refugee children. Again, they have made use particularly of that kind of um, uh, visual expression. It's not quite, I know what you mean, because they're not. It's not necessarily about responding to the art. It's more about uh, using the visual expressively.
Yeah.
But but I think um, it it has been a way of kind of validating. Um, a lot of these young people have been displaced that these organisations are working with, but even when they're when people were simply displaced from their own friends or their own schools, it was a way of saying, this is my reality, and this matters. It's a kind of way of validating, self-validation of that reality in a way, and saying it's still small or otherwise, enclosed or otherwise, it still has meaning, it still has a shape back to form, it still has something, um, some dimensions about it that I can explore, and I think that I'm not clearly I'm not an expert in all of this, but I can it resonates with me that there is, and photography can do the same thing, that there is
Yeah.
a way of kind of almost remaking your world, especially when it's a world that is unfamiliar or that you don't feel you quite belong in. And it's a way of helping yourself to belong again in that reality,
Yeah. Yeah.
or belong at all.
It reminds me, you were talking about the people in Scotland in the
Yeah,
woods with their
yes,
cameras,
yeah.
and a camera turns on a certain kind of attention. I mean, and so we spent a lot of time talking about attention within this program because it's kind of the very basic skill that you need to be able to pay attention to what's outside and then to turn that in. And the visual arts kind of do that for us. We turn that attention out, completely out, and we take those things in, and then we notice what's going on with us, maybe in the product that we've created, the photograph or the drawing, or maybe in someone else's work we're able to see something. But it's that whole sort of paying attention out and in that's very clearly a part of that process. And you know I really don't draw well, but to sit with something and draw it, you get to know it in a very deep, intimate way. Think of Cezanne drawing the same things over and over again. You know,
Or
um,
absolutely, or of John Ruskin. Similarly, he was based on Lake Coniston, but just as Cezanne would keep drawing his home and the mountain, and
mhm,
the name of
yeah,
the mountain, but the mountains, Saint Victoire, and he would
yeah,
keep building that out, drawing it over and over again. Ruskin used to draw. He had a kind of turret, and he would draw the sky, and he would record the way the sky looked. Um,
mm,
you know,
yeah,
all day, or the way the lake looked. And it's really interesting to me, although I don't feel I know much about the visual arts, but all of the writers that I care about, the 19th century realist writers who are great noticers, they're close readers of
hmm,
life and
yeah,
everything, all loved Ruskin because Charlotte Bronte said that Ruskin, in his um, work Modern Painters, where he defends the painter Turner, but he's basically saying this is what nature looks like. You have pages and pages and pages of what a leaf looks like. If you really look at it, this is what a leaf looks like. And Charlotte Bronte said he taught her how to see, how to see nature. And
yeah.
so I think that's my sort of orientation, really, that I feel all the time that I need to be taught how to see by painters or by poets,
Mm,
or
yeah,
that's what art can do. It can
yeah.
help you to see the world anew.
All right. Well, so we've talked about music, sort of a little bit, and then there are the more um, movable arts and the more participatory in a way, like drama, dance. I mean, these are things that you naturally, if you're going to do them, if you're going to be part of the making of them, you're with a lot of other people as opposed to painting, writing,
Yeah,
whatever. Yeah.
yeah.
So what's your experience in dance and drama?
I know people who are experienced in them. I wouldn't say my own experience is very strong, but there are a couple of things that have really um, I've worked with people trying to research what's happening,
Right.
and I've also worked with charities who've used dance and drama with children. I mean, the most memorable thing for me recently was um, this was a charity working with refugee children on the Lebanese Syrian border. So they'd kind of been, all they'd ever known really was life in a sort of refugee camps, you know, served by NGOs, non-governmental organizations and charities and so on. And they weren't sure, they can't have been sure, how can they have been sure where they belonged or, you know,
Mm.
quite.
Yeah.
So what was really interesting was this description of dance. It was particularly dance and the sort of embodied, because even if you're with other people and that is part of the experience, you're also it's your own body, it remains your own body. But that
Yeah.
was the point, really, that people who are not sure who they are, when they're dancing, when they're physically wholly engaged with it, they might not know who they are, but they know that they are. You know that they can't. You know that
Mm.
they are there is something that
Vitality.
exactly exactly that and agency and all of those things that may have been taken away from them and kind of giving
Yeah.
the capacity to say, you know, this my body can do this, you know, and freely.
Yeah.
So that was very, very powerful for somebody who knows nothing really about, uh, you know, the practice of dance but I do know that Stern's whole kind of vitality effect theory has been applied to dance as well. Again, I don't know very much about it, but this idea that you know what goes on between mother and infant can be kind of replicated in that the dynamic that happens between people dancing together. You know, because you're always looking for that thread. You know, you're always looking for the thing that kind of brings you into affinity. So I thought that was astounding as
Mm.
well. Um, but yeah, I have worked with people who've kind of researched dance at length as well, and you know, they as participants, which is quite interesting. They've taken themselves as a kind of subject going through a series of different kinds of dance and just the different sense of one's whole self, you know, at one's whole body that can give, particularly, I think, to women maybe, but you know, only because more women are doing it. Um, so I find this fascinating without, if I'm honest, being an expert, but the I would say that the kind of literal sense of the body that you get in dance and movement is actually still quite strongly there. You know, when you're listening to music or
Mm.
people often describe their reactions, don't they, in very physical terms.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
It hit, I mean, with a poet, it hit me, you know, it kind of, it struck me. And right there, it was like a slap, you know, and these
Yeah.
are quite violent images, I know, but it's a kind of measure of how kind of powerful those responses are.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So you can see dance as a kind of as a way of sort of taking up the capacities of the body again, I suppose, and using them.
Yeah. I'm looking at our time here and realizing that we have a lot of recording done.
Oh,
Um,
right, okay.
so, so I wanna just make sure that that we have a chance to reflect, close this up. I mean, we've covered a lot of ground. Um, I can say that for me, what came from this is one, that idea of vitality as being a thread that runs through all of this, and that sharing that vitality that sense of being alive is just such a wonderful thing to do with your child, and is, worth far more than a lot of the things that we feel like we need to give our kids, or feel
Yes.
like we need to go out and get for our kids. It's that kind of, we're both alive. We're both living
Yeah.
creatures, and we're having this relationship, and sometimes it's great and sometimes we get loud, and all of that is just wonderful, and you can see it everywhere else in the world, right? You can read a story about it, you can see a program about it, you can go to the theater, you can watch dancers, all, reflecting things that you either know now, or maybe you'll know later about yourself. So so that's like a rolling theme for this. And I think the other takeaway for me is that it doesn't have to be planned out, expensive, involve travel and other people and all that kind of stuff. You can grab your kid by the hand and say, "Let's sit down here. Let's do this." So, it's really within everyone's possibilities. I loved what you were saying about no matter where you are. If
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
were in a clinic, you say in a clinical situation, in a cozy
Yeah.
spot, wherever it happens to be, sort of the art and your living your lives takes care of the rest. So,
Yeah.
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 So how about for you? Did you have a takeaway or so?
Yeah, it's quite interesting to think. Well, I was thinking of what you were saying about having a store of things as well. I hadn't realized how often I said that reminds me. This is
Hmm.
connected to you asked me to for some words of wisdom. It's connected to what I'm going to say, so I could mention those words of wisdom now if you like. But I was
Sure.
well, I can kind of segue into them. The I think it is really important to have to build up a set of resources that people can turn to. I mean, this is where I started from with Marion Milner in a way that um, she had them all, but she didn't know what to do with them. So it's no good having the resources and not knowing what to do with them. But you also when she knew what to do with them, she had them there, and that's you need to kind of build up that store of experiences, but also of places. What does Rothko call them? Pockets that you can turn to, which might be a book. I mean, this book I have turned to, often in my life, and it's a really, it's like for me a kind of how-to book, but it's not written like that at all. It's a human voice, but um, whether it's pieces of music or just walking, just that kind of experience. If you know that it's good for you, it's like Wordsworth says, if you have the experience, then you'll know that you can return to it, that you know
Hmm.
it's possible for it to happen again. He doesn't say quite that, I'm misquoting him, but it's something to do with habit being something that allows you always to find a way, to find a way out or a way in, maybe.
Hmm.
Um, so on that note, when is it time? Can I mention the words of
Oh,
wisdom?
please. Yes.
So you may know this book, which is Jeanette Winterson, the writer Jeanette
Oh,
Winterson's
yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
memoir, and I have used it before, so you may this may be familiar as well. But it's such a good way of thinking about it. So her adoptive mother, who doesn't like the books that she's reading, in adolescence, where she says she needs a tough language, she needs a medicine to get her through adolescence. But her mother burns all of these books because she thinks she shouldn't be reading them.
Ooh.
Um, but what she says is that the books were gone, but what they held was already inside me. And she talks elsewhere about reading, but I think this would go for everything else we've been talking about, really, kind of laying down a pearl lining where you're taking in more than you know, and it will go on doing its work. So it's kind of depositing this almost protective lining when you have these kind of resources that we're thinking of in terms of art. Um, you're aligning, I guess, insofar as they have protected you and they've let you know they can protect you in the future, but also that they exist in the world and that you are able to respond to them and be protected again.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Aligning. I like that. Yeah.
A pearl lining. Yeah, it's lovely, isn't it?
Yeah. Cool. So, well, I want to thank you for talking with us about these things. It has been wonderful. I have learned so much. And my goodness, I am going to, I have added to my vocabulary and
Oh, I'm delighted. Thank
added to
you for
my practices.
inviting me. Sorry, I cut you off there, Don.
No, that's all right.
No, it's been a delightful hour. I feel much calmer than I did an hour ago.
Wow, okay. Excellent. Slipped away from all the other selves for a while and just
Yeah.
talked about something
Remember what's
that you
important.
love. So,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
wonderful.